Example number 2 now, we're going to multiply more radicals with negative numbers. So let's check out how these guys work here. So let's start out with this guy, square root of negative 16 times square root of negative 25. Now let's just simplify each radical, and then we'll take its product or multiply them, okay? Okay, so let's simplify this guy. So square root of negative 16 is 4i. Again, if you want to, you can break it down by saying square root of negative 1 times square root of 16, which square root of negative 1 is I, square root of 16 is 4. Okay, but you could just straight go from here to here and say 4i. Times the square root of negative 25 is 5i. Okay, so now 4 times 5, okay, if we multiply these guys right now, give us 20. And then just like when we multiply two variables together, I times I is going to give us I squared. Okay, but now we can actually simplify I squared. Okay, well, let's go back to the definition of I. I was the square root of negative 1. Okay, so if I want to know, well, what's the equivalent of I squared? Well, let's square both sides. If I square the left side and if I square the right side, I have I squared equals, remember, if I square a square root, the root cancels with the power, and I'm left with just negative 1. So there we go. So actually, I squared is negative 1. So I can replace the negative, or I can replace the I squared with negative 1. So 20 times negative 1, that's just going to be negative 20. So that would be the simplified answer there. Okay. Now, one thing that I do want to mention, though, real quick here is the following. Notice that I did not multiply negative 16 times a negative 25. Okay, first, I want to simplify my negative radicals first. Okay, let me just show you this thing here. So watch out for this nerdiness right here. Okay, the square root of negative 4 times the square root of negative 9 does not equal the square root of negative 4 times negative 9. Okay, yes, it is true for positive radicals. So if I said positive radical 4 times positive radical 9, that does equal 4 times the radical 4 times 9. But it's not true when you have negatives inside of the radical. Okay, it's only true. It's only true for non-negative. When there are no negatives in the radical, then you can go ahead and multiply them together. But you can't do the same thing when they are negative there. Okay, which brings us now to example 2, part B. So to say that we're not going to do square root of 30. Okay, so this does not equal the square root of 30. Okay, let's simplify this. This right here is 6i, right? Because this is the square root of 6 times the square root of negative 1, right? And this right here is 5i. So 6 and 5 is 30. And then again, I times I is I squared. And we established that I squared is negative 1. So that's going to be negative 30. All right, let's see what's going on here in part C. Not too bad, right? I mean, sometimes the I stays and sometimes it goes. Let's see here. Negative radical 8 times negative radical 6. Let's simplify this little dude. And this right here becomes the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 2, right? Which this is 2i. So 2i times radical 2. Okay. And so this right here replaced this guy. Okay, so that's that dude. And then let's now replace the square root of negative 6 as just 6i. Okay. So now let's multiply our coefficients together. 2 and 6 gives us our 12. Multiply I times I, which is I squared. And then, of course, we have our radical 2. And last but not least, I squared is negative 1. So it's going to be a negative 12 radical 2. Okay, so that would be for part C. And last but not least, part D. Again, we're not going to multiply negative 5 and 7. So this does not equal radical negative 35. Okay, you want to simplify each one first. So the square root of negative 5 is 5i And the square root of 7 is just radical 7. Oops, let's actually leave this in the radical there, like it didn't disappear. And then 7, 5 gives us 30. So that's radical 30. And then I. So square root of 30, or I times square root of 30. Okay. You know what? Shoot. I'm looking at this example right here in part C. I just saw that right now. I just made this a 6i. This should have been radical 6, right? This should have been a radical 6. So I'm just highlight that part right there was a small error. So really, let's just redo this part then. This answer is going to change. So let's see. If I multiply 2, it's still 2. I multiply I times I. Okay, so I get I squared. And then 2 and 6 is going to give us radical 12. Okay. And then 2 times I squared is negative 2. So negative 2 radical 12. But we know how to break down radical 12, so let's just keep going here. That's radical 4 and radical 3. This right here is negative 2 times 2 radical 3. Okay, this right here is 2. So negative 4 radical 3. And that should be what the answer ought to be.